Richard, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, Brian, glad to be here.
So before we start, August 4th, 2020, SpaceX had Demo 2 touchdown in the Gulf of Mexico. 2 NASA astronauts. Know you're a big rocket enthusiast. What did that day mean to you?
Yeah, it was kind of knuckle biting, right? Because you know all the things that can go wrong at each stage. So I tuned in well after they had separated from the space station and right before their deorbit burn. So, and that's a big one, right? What if the engines fail and there's nobody to go rescue them if they just sit there in orbit for, they could probably live a few days, right? Maybe a week. And then they deorbit and we know they're on track to splash down, but you always wonder, a little bit off, they could bounce off the atmosphere and they could land, in Florida instead of off the coast.
Sure.
But nope, they're coming down. But then you got the drogue chutes coming out, then you got the full chute coming out, and each one of those could fail, and then finally it splashed down. And even after all that, all went smoothly, miraculous, it's perfect. And then there was some sort of
giant squid.
Yeah, it sucks it
whatever. Yeah.
Or in this case, there was a gas leak of some sort.
Yeah.
And so the poor astronauts had to sit inside their capsule for an extra hour or so, waiting for that to be fixed or checked or whatever.
That's got to be a little nerve-wracking. Right?
Yeah, because hypergolic fuels are scary, right? You mix them together, they burst into flames.
Yeah.
And so they could have, well, we don't talk about what could have happened, but it could be bad.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Anyways, all's well that ends well. And the other thing that you really got to realize is the astronauts did nothing the whole time, right? They just were passengers. Yeah, spam in a can, as they used to call it.
Yeah.
But what that indicates is that this is great for passenger flights, right? You don't need highly trained astronauts because everybody's doing it from ground, which only makes sense.
Yeah.
And then Alon had a very interesting tweet because when they were over New Zealand starting the re-entry burn, he pointed out that they were over New Zealand and landing in Florida in 37 minutes. Hint, hint, we can have around the world travel in 37 minutes.
Yeah. And you add in airport security lines and it's like less than 6 hours.
That's right. That's right.
When I was watching it, I actually didn't get to watch it live, but I watched it after the fact. And, I always try to put it in perspective about what we've done. And I think about like the Wright brothers. So in the early 1900s, they had the first, sustainable flight, heavier than air, et cetera, et cetera. But less than 70 years, 1969, we get a man on the moon. And that's 70 years is not a lot of time, right? Mm-hmm. And it's pretty amazing that we made that jump. And it makes me think, okay, this is what we've been able to do with rocketry and so advanced and reusable rockets and this and that and the space station.
Yep.
Where are we going to be in 70 years from now? I mean, it's hard to imagine. And I know you're, is it your undergrad degree that you have in
aerospace?
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? You're in a more educated perspective to predict that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, my grandfather was born before the Wright brothers. So he was, I think, 15 when the Wright brothers flew and probably read about it in the papers or something. And then by the time I was born, he was flying on commercial jets and he got to, watch the TV as man landed on the moon, all in a span of one lifetime.
That's pretty amazing.
And yeah, my perspective was a little twisted, right? I went to school thinking I could be an astronaut, had a little height issue. I was well over the tallest allowed for an astronaut in eyesight, another issue. And I was never a fighter pilot and never could have been.
Yeah.
But at any rate, I went to aerospace engineering because we were promised. I mean, it was U.S. policy to have a permanent manned base on the moon by 1984. And I graduated in 82.
Okay.
Of course, by then, the space shuttle was no longer being manufactured. There were no jobs. So I ended up in automotive. But, so it was kind of a false hope that we're just going to move out into the stars. But thankfully, Elon Musk and 104 other entrepreneurs are all working towards commercial space flight now. So now we're in a position that the automotive industry
is that the real number? Is it 104? Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And I only know a handful of them, but some of them you haven't heard of, and yet they've.
And this is globally. This isn't just in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah, because one of the Space Science is one of the cooler ones, and they're launching from New Zealand, in the
Okay.
New Zealand company.
Great.
They kind of pulled a fast one on whoever regulates satellites, because they launched a satellite for India without getting permission from anybody.
Oh,
It's supposed to be CubeSats, but then they snuck in this official commercial satellite.
depending on what country does that, that might cause some problems.
Yeah, that could be some real problems. Yeah, so 104 entrepreneurial efforts. Obviously, funding's just being poured into it, and of course, Bezos and Musk
Yeah.
are the biggest, and
Yeah.
with the most
Virgin, of
plans.
course.
Virgin as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah,
very-
by the end of next year, you'll be able to pay $250,000 and fly into space. Probably not orbital. Within 3 years, orbital easy. Don't forget that also within 3 years, supposedly, I think it's a Japanese, entrepreneur, millionaire, is going to buy a flight around the moon from SpaceX. And so he and 5 of his chosen artists are all going to go around the moon and back.
okay.
That'll be an amazing
That's pretty
venture.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's a little bit cooler than you and I trying to get to all 7 of the continents, right? That takes.
that's right. That's right.
And I know we're both still working on Antarctica, but
Yeah.
all the rest.
We got to combine forces on that.
Yeah,
it's-
something down
yeah.
there. Well, let's talk about your book. This is your 105th book, I think. Is that right?
Something like that. It feels like that.
And I actually have a copy here. I'll try to get it to display here. Here we go.
Yep.
The Security Yearbook 2020.
Yep.
So what's
Works
this all
better if I
about?
do it.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. So at RSA 2019, I was launching a book. It was called Secure Cloud Transformation, and I love the experience. It was obviously a draw for the vendor to have people come to the booth to get a free book signed by the author. So that was awesome. I said, wow, I got to have a book for next year. At the same time, half the people coming up to me, asked me to sign the book, explained that they were new to the industry. Some of them they said, yeah, I got hired by a vendor 2 weeks ago, and they sent me here to learn everything I could. And, talk about drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
So that's when it occurred to me, I should write the history of our industry. It's been, you could say it's 25 years old. It's time for there to be a history of it. Looked around, and sure enough, there isn't any other than this one. And I wanted to shy away from history of cryptography, because there's tons of books on that, right? Because that's a fascinating space, all about these geniuses discovering cool stuff.
A ton of World War II stories that you can.
Oh yeah, and you can go all the way back to Caesar, right?
Yeah. Caesar ciphers, and
That's right. So, but the security industry, had to wait for the internet to come around. And one of the guys I interviewed was Gil Schwed, founder of Checkpoint, and he had the idea for a firewall that would have worked between networks in the military in Israel. But he and his friends Shlomo Kramer and Narius Mock, really decided that there's no market for it, right? That networks aren't big enough to need this firewall.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, the internet took off, and all of a sudden you did need a gateway device between your corporation and the world. So he told me the whole story of how they got together, and amazingly small group before, like 5 total employees before they sold Sun Microsystems, and including Checkpoint software in their catalog, which just opened up the world to them, right? 3 years later, they went public after that single, deal that they did. So they also created the channel that everybody in the space talks about, right? Every vendor wants to sell through the channel because it's a multiplying factor.
Yeah, and anybody that was around back then, certainly you were, and I was getting my start. I mean, Checkpoint was it.
Right.
I mean, everybody was running Checkpoint. It was pre-Nokia appliances. You're usually running it on a Sunbox. It could be, could be Solaris 2.6 running, running Checkpoint. I remember my first version of Checkpoint came on multiple 3.5-inch floppy drives that you would actually install on a Sun server. Eventually, we upgraded that to a CD, and we were able to install it that way. But Checkpoint certifications and everything was Checkpoint, and everybody knew all the different sites, Phone Boy and things like that for support. It was just it was a whole massive ecosystem. It was everywhere. Yeah.
Yep. And they built it from scratch. They went to ISPs and said, hey, if you're selling an internet connection to a business, you should sell them a firewall as well. And that's how they got going, including the ISP I worked at. And that's how I got to know Shlomo and Marius and Gil way back then.
Yeah.
So in that, a little bit of this is the old guy in the industry being nostalgic, right? And talking about how we did it in the old days. But a lot of it is, listen, if you're going to try an idea and you've got some cool idea for, I'm going to randomize the system calls, inside a server so that no 0 day is going to work because it won't be calling the right register in memory. It's been done before and it failed miserably. So it better be better this time and cheaper and really work. But, I talked to kids that were doing a startup like that and they had never heard of Santa Security. Just like, who, what? And sure enough, you go to research it and it's, unless you know the name of the company, it's really, really hard to dig that out. And something that's bothered me for years and years, when a company is getting going, there's a press release about their launch. There's a press release about each financing. There's a press release about each major customer or partner win. Boom, boom, boom. When the company's failing, they fire the PR team and they stop spending money on press releases. So there's no record of what happened at the demise, right? It's only rare that you'll have a company that fails drastically and then everybody writes about it. But a lot of companies just kind of ease off into the background or finally get acquired. Like, what happened to iPolicy, right? You'd have to dig deep to understand that they had been acquired by an Indian company for less than $2 million.
Yeah.
And they were the first single pass multifunction firewall.
Well, you look at something like ISS. ISS was actually pre-Satan for a
that's right,
analyzing tool. And those who don't know, Satan was, a very early on vulnerability scanner, report scans, etc.
ISS and CyberCop. I use both those.
Yeah, and CyberCop. Yeah. ISS kind of, they went from they became an actual company at that point, and it became an IDS, and then they got acquired by IBM. And there's this whole evolution from where it is now. So it's pretty interesting.
They acquired the ISP reseller that I was working at called Netrix. Okay. So, and they had become an MSSP. So now even IBM's managed security service still has a SOC here in Michigan. That's that old SOC.
Yeah.
So, you're the perfect person to talk to us about, right? Because you love the history and tracking who's where. And you and I always get together when we want to figure out what's hot and new.
Yeah.
So the book is written for all the old guys like us, including you, and who, will enjoy reading what they know and maybe disagreeing with my recollection of it. Sure. But also all the newbies and people just getting into it, and, marketing people and product people and salespeople and entrepreneurs, students for sure. It's, cybersecurity is the hot thing to learn in school and get certified. Wouldn't you like to know about the tools that are used? The lack of education and tools has always bugged me. And even at Michigan, the only reason I got a job after going to Michigan was that I had 3 semesters of using a particular software tool that my employer used, and they wanted that experience. They put it in the ad. Same thing with cybersecurity tools, right? You graduate with this undergraduate degree in cybersecurity, which is a lot of Python and stuff like that. Yeah. And, you're not going to find job postings for that. We want somebody with 0 experience in Python, but knows the language. But you are going to find ads. Hey, we need a Fortinet admin. We need a Cisco ASA admin.
Somebody that knows this.
Teach the tools. And even the vendors they're so short-sighted. Unlike, remember Apple back in the day, they kind of won a major foothold in the industry by supplying computers at very low cost to all the universities. And great in high schools as well. But you don't see that very often, other than Cisco. Cisco has a networking certification.
Sun used to do it. Oracle, Sybase used to see more of that, right? And
it's just planting seeds.
Yeah,
planting seeds for your future.
College, knowing Access database instead of
right. Exactly.
Yeah. So how much of this, you're at Gartner for a number of years, and I know there, and then afterwards you continue to track the cybersecurity companies.
Yep.
How many are you tracking right now? What's the latest number?
Latest number is I've got a big tranche of vendors that I haven't cataloged yet.
Yeah.
So I may add 900 to the 2,300 that are in this book.
Wow. So 3,000 plus.
Right.
You're looking at, and that's
right.
globally, of course, because I
globally, yeah,
big chunk out of Israel and some other
right.
locations.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then always, the caveat that I just can't see into China. I just don't know how many vendors are there. I mean, it could be hundreds, but if they ever, come past the Chinese wall and have a website in English, then I'll eventually find them, and then I'll add them.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I first got a copy of Red Flag Linux, which was their version of Red Hat. It was the exact same thing. I mean, there was no difference. I mean,
right.
I don't know if it was byte for byte, but it was pretty darn close. So
yep.
Guessing there might be some of that happening as well, where hey, this
oh yeah
looks and feels a lot like Checkpoint or Cisco.
Oh, it's amazing. You go to the trade shows and they'll have a booth for all of China, and there'll be all these vendors there, and you get talking to them and you realize that they're giant, right? They're as big as Cisco already, as number of employees, because they started in telecom and they create telecom equipment, which for some reason takes a lot of people. But then they added in for every category of security product, they have an appliance, IPS, WAF, they've got them all. And I don't know if they stole them, because it's really not, if you've got 2,000 engineers, it's not that hard to create any of these products. Yeah. But sure helps if you can reverse engineer the existing ones.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad somebody like you is kind of tracking these and putting them together and putting this information out there. I mean, clearly you have a very analytical background, but you're sort of in the trenches years with Gartner, and then working with startups and things like that as well gives you a very rounded perspective. I think looking at the space when you did this research and finally put the book together, were there some real standouts of trends that you're seeing, or something that you thought would happen but just isn't happening yet, or what were some of the aha moments?
Well, one aha is that there are very few failures, right? It's almost, and I see people tweeting this all the time, that there's turnover in the vendors that are out there. Very few. I mean, basically, if you can create a security product that people will buy from you for more than a year, you stay in business, right? Even if you only have a few customers.
That's interesting. Okay.
And then the PitchBooks and the Crunchbases don't see most of the vendors because they're doing so well. They start with a service and then add products later. They don't see them because they never take funding, which is when they appear on the radar of all those groups. So there's, one of my favorite companies is Sentinel Ips. And, the name got my attention. So I started talking to them, and it's basically a reputation firewall, right? It just keeps track of 5 million bad IP addresses.
Sure.
And updates every 5 minutes. So you don't have to worry about, the usual issues with reputation. And I think at last count, they had 500 customers. Wow. Right? And they're just small businesses, pay a monthly fee, and they manage it all for them, so the business doesn't have to do anything. And there's, probably over 500 companies that are that size and doing that well.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, that's interesting. I always thought I was just really, really good, but I guess no, that's good to hear that there's a lot surviving. A number of things that we see too is, of course, with those, we'll use 3,000 as our number. It's still a lot of overlap, or are you seeing some kind of net new ideas, creative things come out instead of our firewall turns red and our firewall turns blue?
Right. Yeah, tons of overlap in established areas where the differentiation almost comes down to, well, we're in Perth, so you should buy local instead of buying from Sydney where they sell Fortinet gear. And there's a brand new one called Red Piranha, which is a UTM appliance, and it's in Perth, and they're doing great. They're selling in Taiwan and glowing growing regionally at least. And it's like, I'm scratching my head. I thought, here I'm thinking of zero trust and SASE models, and appliances are well gone from being viable as a business model, and startups are still making them.
Yeah.
Because still, most companies are late adapters. Just because Stiennon says, hey, you can replace your entire multi-million-dollar hardware appliance stack with a cloud service.
Yeah.
Only 10% are going to do it this year, and another 10% next year.
Especially that thick middle area of the pyramid, right? When you're getting into those mid-market folks that just might not have the wherewithal to embrace the cloud, right? And they kind of they get this, or they have people on staff that already get it because they've been doing it this way, right? So it's, we certainly
a huge market, if you sell into it, is state and local government. Right. And they have laws, regulations internally that say thou shalt not put anything on the cloud. Thou shalt not work from home. That went away, but they had to jump over that hurdle before they could actually support people working from home during COVID.
Yeah. How do you think this is going to change? And you brought up COVID, like K through 12, and we'll even throw higher ed in there as it relates to, my kids, they start school tomorrow, and I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. They start school, and this will be August 13th when they're starting. We're recording this before it will air, but how do you think this is going to change that? And I keep on seeing all these articles. There was even one in The Economist who was on the cover that higher ed has changed forever. The way people go to school is not going to be the way they were. And one person said, think of it like that Peloton, those exercise bikes where you can get on this bike and you can get a trainer from anywhere in the world, the very best trainers and the best classes doing the coolest, latest things. And people can subscribe to this and just go and join it whenever it makes sense. Why wouldn't they do that for AP US history and advanced algebra 2 and all these other classes? And is that going to be the future, you think? And if so, there's all the cybersecurity concerns around.
Right. Yeah. First of all, I think it's a complete wet dream. Not going to happen.
Yeah.
That was Steve Jobs was the first one who ever, when his kids were going to school, like many Silicon Valley entrepreneurs, they'll go, oh my God, education is totally screwed up. We got to do something about it. Yeah. So he had a vision of everyone learns AP history from the best history teacher in the world. Right. And, your chemistry is taught by the best chemistry teacher ever, kind of centralizing that instead of the distributed hire more teachers model that we have. And a crisis like COVID is definitely changing the enterprise. They are finally accepting work from home and starting to invest more in work from home environments for people. And they are going to realize, especially as we watch COVID just slop back and forth in the toilet bowl like this, that they're going to have to not, say, okay, everybody back to the office, bring in your equipment, turn in your router, blah, blah. No, they're going to keep all that investment there and think seriously about reducing their lease space and how to work all that out. So they're going to do that because they're driven by, cost and profits.
Sure.
Schooling is not that way. And it's always been messed up and always. And even though I think there could be a good remote learning experience, I got my master's at King's College in London, but that was remote. And I had to, I figured out how to fill in. So I used a little bit of that model of going to the best. So, you'd have a reading list and it'd be all these academics talking about cyber and warfare. But most of them were still alive. So you Google them and you find a YouTube video of them giving the lecture. And you watch the expert give the lecture on his own fundamental paper. Yeah. So the school didn't suggest you do that, but I was just enriching my education. Yeah. Well, grade school kids aren't going to do that. So we would have to have amazing content development. And it can't just, my daughter is starting next week as a teacher in a high school. And the school has zero plans for online teaching. They're just gonna, the government said we have to open the schools, so we're opening the schools until told otherwise. But we don't have a plan afterwards. And there's a requirement that all teaching has to be made available to all students. So, of course, many students don't have good internet connectivity, but some can't learn on a computer, right? They might be on a spectrum, they might be blind, they might not have the use of their hands,
or they just don't learn that well in that kind of environment.
right?
And
Or
I
they
think there's a
just
lot.
can't do it,
Yeah.
right? And I can imagine, the poor kids with ADHD, and they're treated with Ritalin and the rest of those. They have a hard enough time sitting still in their seats in a classroom. Get them to sit down and do what we do all day on Zoom. I get antsy being on Zoom all day, right? So I feel sorry for them, but maybe there's a model where those kids that can't do it can go to a special environment that is safe for them, and they can still learn.
Yeah. It's so I have one daughter that's going to be a sophomore, and another daughter that's going to be in 8th grade, and luckily they have a lot of interactions with their friends outside of school. There's still some sports that you can do, and there's get-togethers, and people still have those interactions. But just the people that don't have any kind of interaction, I think it's just going to make them more and more withdrawn, right? So the person that was maybe a little introverted to start with, being put into this situation is, and I know we're getting a little off track here, but my original intent was like, look, they're all connecting. We've already had issues with some of the sharing platforms, with people going on there and doing inappropriate things, and I think a lot of that is being addressed or has already been addressed. And there's cheating, and how do you prevent kids from cheating? And if you have a video camera on in a kid's room while they're monitoring them while they're taking a test, and is it still on after? I mean, there's all these types of things that have to be considered. So I think if we're going to keep doing this to a large extent, and there's been online education for a very long time, but if it's going to be done at this level, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more cybersecurity companies kind of focusing on that particular piece of the puzzle, which didn't really make sense as a business model before.
Right. Yeah, I'm excited for what they're going to do, because imagine if you didn't have to have so many teachers in classrooms. There'd be money to spend on pulling those that don't have the technology up and giving them good stuff. And man, when you think of the educational stuff that's already available online, if you just had a curated, okay, now we're going to watch this YouTube video on 3 different ways to do multiplication, and then we'll talk about it afterwards and see which one you like the best. And here's a little app, and we're going to test right now, how you do. And
Khan Academy used to be this groundbreaking thing. Now there's 100 flavors of that.
Right.
It's great. It's great, but it's a far cry from Socrates and Plato sitting under a tree talking about Western philosophy and democracy and things like that. And probably has to be something in the middle. But we'll see. The naysayers, it's never going to go back. This is the way it's going to be forever. It's going to have to evolve. And the realist in me says, when you're in the middle of something, it always looks like it's never going to end. So
that's right.
We'll see what happens. But
on
a happier note, we recently as Mandiant, as part of FireEye, released a security effectiveness report for 2020, and we did one a couple years prior to that. And I don't want to go through all the stats or anything like that, but given that you've just done this cybersecurity yearbook, most of the time, I would say less than 40% of the time, we find that preventative controls, incident detection controls, and alerting tools across endpoint, email, network, and cloud, less than 40% across the board are actually working the way people think they should be. They're actually blocking that attack, detecting that attack, alerting that attack, whether it's a piece of malware or data exfiltration or C2 or beaconing. I think those numbers have been pretty static since you and I have been in the industry from the early days. But do you see that changing anytime soon? Do you think this whole idea of optimization and getting value and ensuring that your security controls are actually doing what you're supposed to do? Do you still see that as a pretty big gap for most organizations?
Yeah, huge gap. And I see it changing, but a couple of things have to change first. And one is, we've talked in the past about comparison of quality control to the effectiveness tooling that you deploy. And so first you got to go over that jump to say we want to be more effective with the tools we have, right? And that's a lot different than, oh my gosh, this new thing will stop ransomware, so we're going to buy that, or stop phishing attacks, or we have to do more security awareness training.
Like Capeless Auditor with this report.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, exactly, mate. So so once you make that decision and you start to instrument your security tools and measure their effectiveness, then you can start thinking about the optimization that you get by tightening those bands, saving, if the tools become twice as effective, so 80% effective, then your SOC doesn't have to work as hard. You don't need as many SOC employees because they're not chasing as many alerts, and use those arguments to justify the investment in what you're doing on security instrumentation, and the testing goes with it. So, but organizations just aren't in that mode. It's not like a manufacturer, right? Because they scramble to get the first product out the door, and then over years they optimize it, right? Because investors and stockholders want to see profits, so you take $1 of cost out of it. You make 1 million parts, so you just save $1 million, and you just keep doing that. And now we've got highly mature automobiles and washing machines and all the rest. You look at them and wow, they really skimped on quality, right? Because they're thin and all these parts, but they're making them at an affordable price.
Yeah.
And I think because we have the outside threat actors, we're scrambling too fast to address the latest and greatest that they're coming up, because they're innovating as fast as the entrepreneurs are coming up with ways to stop them.
Yeah.
And it's the arms race idea. So we've got to patch. Don't we have to patch all of our Intel processors this week? And Microsoft has 24 new vulnerabilities, and we got a lot of work this week. We can't think about getting better at what we do.
Yeah. One of the trends I'm really seeing, and I know you've seen this too, we've chatted about it before, is environmental drift. And I always think of it like a new car. You buy a new car, and the first few weeks, few months, maybe even year, you treat it really well. You're washing it a lot. You're keeping it extra clean. The dog doesn't get to go inside. Fast forward a year or two, there's been an empty bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken in the back seat for 3 weeks, and 2 of your tires need air, and your engine light's on, and what I see is when people initially get a new solution, a new security solution, it's probably implemented pretty well. I'll give them that, and maybe the provider, the VAR did it, or the vendor did it, or the team that's operating actually installed in there. They're really on top of it, but a month goes by, a quarter goes by, a year goes by. It's no longer the shiny new thing, and it starts to get some bit rot, right? And now something that was maybe 60, 70, 80% effective is down to 20, 30, 40% effective. And that environmental drift just seems to be a massive issue, especially when it's compounded with the, cybersecurity individuals, the fact that we just don't have enough, right? That there's this gap, this talent gap, if you will. Right. How do we help address things like that, as it relates to these environmental drift issues?
Yeah, I think, one answer is switch out your products every 3 years, and then you'll do a good job of installing the new one. Because you'll say, oh man, things are getting past my old antivirus, even though you could go in and just tune it, so they didn't. But you think, oh, we hate those guys, we'll get the new guys, and keep swapping it up for the latest thing. But to do it effectively, it should be this a different meaning of the word hygiene, going back and looking at whoever looks at their firewall policies, right? It's supposedly organizations have 20,000 rule sets. You probably could optimize that, which would make it a lot easier to test it and a lot easier to understand what's going on when a rule is fired, when you get an alert. I think, and
sometimes when you're in the cloud, things can be a little bit more nebulous. It's sometimes not as easy to get visibility when things are happening. And did that S3 bucket pop up on the wrong side of my WAF?
Right. Exactly. And I think that's why there's so many vendors going to market with basically things that tie into AWS's APIs, and pulls everything down and shows it to you in a nice, understandable way. Because AWS doesn't really want to productize their capabilities, right? They want everybody else to do that.
Yeah.
And
My prediction: cloud security is going to be a big thing. So you looked at over 2,000 vendors for this latest book. Walk me through the process of actually, that's a lot of companies. How'd you go about gathering all this information? What were some of the steps?
Well, I've been doing it for 10 years. And what I tend to do every year is grab all of the vendors who are displaying just at the expos at the major conferences. Sure. Right, so that'll give you the ones that are spending money, right? Yeah. And I'm using some rules, right? So no service providers other than managed security service providers, no consultants, no resellers, no distributors.
Okay.
No law firms, no cyber insurance. But there's one of the most difficult things to do is to determine when a product is a security product or it's a product that's built securely. Right? So somebody will say, we've got a phone system and it's unhackable. And it's not a secure phone system, right? Yeah. Or that's not a security phone system, I guess. The other thing I have to do is, so I gather 2,000 or 3,000. Actually, I gathered 12,000 vendors out of PitchBook, CB Insights, a couple of others. Wow. So you just search on cybersecurity and they just spit out all these vendors.
I'm sure.
Most of them are defunct, and quite a few of them have nothing to do with security at all. And then there's some big decision. Am I going to put Lockheed Martin as a security vendor just because if you're the Air Force, you can buy some security stuff from them? No, it's got to be an appreciable part of your revenue.
Okay.
And I have to leave Cisco in there, even though security is, not a big part of the revenue, but everybody uses Cisco gear. So you got to have them in there. What do you do with Broadcom? What do you do with NTT Docomo? It's all these companies have security divisions in them. So that's a difficult decision to make. And then I have to classify what they do. And that is the hardest task. So I can outsource, as I do, to India, gathering the URLs, company addresses, major executives, and putting them all in my database.
Yep.
And every quarter, checking LinkedIn and see how many employees claim they work at that company. Very valuable information. So I can outsource all that, right? Nobody needs to understand what's going on. But I can't outsource the classification because vendors tend to outright lie about what they do. Yeah. They certainly don't tell you. They don't want to make it easy for you. We sell hardware security appliances for the network. They'll never say that, right? It's always AI to protect your most critical assets, blah, blah, blah.
We're changing the world through machine learning, one bit
at exactly.
What do you do? That's what we do.
Yeah. So you have to dig through that. Quite often you have to ask them for a briefing. And it might take 20 minutes into the briefing before you finally figure out what they do. So labor intensive. Yeah. My eyeballs just bug out after doing it for 2 or 3 days in a row.
Sure.
Next time I do it, because I got the 900 more to do before the book goes to press in December.
Okay.
I'm going to keep track of the worst offenders. I won't name and shame by vendor, but
worst offenders in terms of
what they say on the website.
Not delivering what they say. Is that
not deliver what they say, or just say marketing gobbledygook.
Yeah,
because they're thinking that's how people talk or something.
They copied and pasted it from the 5 other folks that looks like them. Yeah,
right. So I'll name and shame them. I won't name them, but I'll shame them. And you can just Google what I quote, and you can find them.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. There is smoke and mirrors, and there's some snake oil in our space. I like to think there's not too much of it, but it comes up. But a lot of it is the whole Me Too. We do that as well. Oh, we do that too. We have that feature. There's a lot of people that claim to do everything. Just look at how people respond to RFPs. They'll of course, we do all those things, and we do it, but it actually has to be done by services, and we'll have to have somebody sit in your SOC for 6 months to make it happen, as opposed to checking a box or just installing a piece of software. So
and that's fine. That's why you need industry analysts to come in, and it's funny because, so Gartner will come out with a big market scope. This is a new term, and I'm thinking of SASE in particular.
Yeah.
And then all of the hardware appliance vendors will have big websites that describe how they exactly fit this model. And for some reason, it's up to me to call them out and say, no, you're not even close. So stop saying that until you've got something.
Yeah.
And, I don't know, like Gartner analysts don't do that. The competitors don't do it to each other. They all let everybody just get away with this. And I'm just one lone voice and easy to ignore because I don't write magic quadrants anymore.
But you wrote a book on how to get up and to the right in that magic quadrant, which
that's right, I did.
Another book that you should definitely check out. One of my favorites. So how do you talk me through some of the, you don't have to go through all the categories, but what are some of the big categories or maybe some of the newer categories that are in this book?
Yeah, so I broke out you kind of alluded to the fact I don't have a cloud security category. Yeah. And that took, a couple months to figure out. It's like there wasn't anything that had to be called cloud security. It was network security in cloud environments. It was endpoint, et cetera. Yeah. But I broke out other ones that are standalone. Email security doesn't fit in either endpoint or network, or even if it's encrypted email, is it data security? That's where I put most encrypted communications and data security. So I break that out separately because it's so critical, right? It's 90% of all breaches occur through email after all this time. So, and there's a lot of vendors that provide that, and Microsoft being one of them. And then I break out threat intelligence as well, because I do think threat intelligence is definitely a new category. I like it because it's at the pointy end of the spear of a model for doing security that I call threat management instead of risk management.
Yep.
So you got to know your threats if you're going to try and respond proactively to incoming threats.
Yeah.
I love remote browser, what do they call it? Emulation. Is that what it's called? I love it, even though I don't know if it's viable.
What exactly is that one? I'm not.
Oh, it's so cool. So you connect to a proxy outside your network, and the proxy goes to the website. But the proxy is just taking a video image of the website. So all you see is an HTML5 rendition of the website.
Okay.
And somehow the buttons all work and all that stuff. But it's cool because you can't infect yourself through a video image.
Yeah, that's very.
At least nobody's worked that out. The very first time I saw that was Spikes Security, and this guy Spike, his last name was Spikes, was Elon Musk's CISO. Okay. And in SpaceX, everybody's a kind of an academic research scientist, et cetera, and they're like university professors. They don't like any control over where they go.
Of course.
So they let them go everywhere with no content URL filtering, but through this thing he built, and then he tried to commercialize it. There's a new one I saw at RSA that does the same thing, but it's in a hardware appliance, and it's a big box, and they had a glass top on it so you could see inside, and then just rows of Broadcom chips with HDMI ports connecting them. Yeah. So only video could go from the outside to the inside.
Yeah. Each box has 1,000 GPUs in it. And
exactly.
Also use it for cracking passwords.
Yep. Or Bitcoin mining. Yeah. If you could get into that. Yeah. But the real way people are doing it is, host something in the cloud. So it's cloud native, et cetera. And I've got high hopes for that, but we'll see if it.
Any categories disappear? Has anything just kind of gone off the rails, or people just don't need it anymore?
No, it's weird. They're all there, so hardware security modules, still very large companies that manufacture and sell those. They're challenged a little because there's new thing, virtual hardware security modules for key management, key storage and generation. Yeah. That's the thing. Nothing goes away.
It's like a macro level, because if I talk about CISOs and security teams in general, they buy products, but they rarely get rid of products. Right. So they might have some old stodgy proxy server in the basement covered with dust, and the lights are blinking. It's probably doing something, they guess. Right. They don't really know if they've got something else that could have already replaced it. So there's a lot of stacking new products, and they keep on paying renewals and service fee, power, and all that. But that's at a micro level. But it sounds like at a macro level, a lot of these organizations are surviving unless, to your point earlier, unless they do something completely awful, they have some level of staying power.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And, it's the, when people talk about either the consolidation of the industry or this falling off to the wayside, that doesn't happen. It feels like you don't hear about some of these old technologies because, they're making money, right? Somebody was criticizing IBM, and people used to work there, and it's too bad that they just lost all this market share and all this opportunity and all the rest. Like, look at their stock, right? They're worth over 100 billion, and they're kicking out $2 to $4 a quarter in profits, right, per share, right? So they're at that end. They're at that end stage. That's how, I always tell Wall Street analysts who complain about a tech company, especially a security tech company, not being profitable. I go, look at it. Once they're profitable, they're at their end of life, right? Now they're cashing in. That's why you invest when they're not profitable. Their stock goes up because their profits go up, later in life. And that's when you start selling the stock, right? Because it's end of life for them. So keep your eye open for that. Unless they stay relevant by doing acquisitions or, transitioning to the cloud effectively, et cetera.
Of course.
And that I feel that the big security appliance vendors are in that stage or coming up to that stage right now. Over the next 2 years, they will either have to totally remake themselves, which means their revenue drops, their stock value drops, private equity comes in, takes them private, and then they retool to be the new thing, and they go public.
Later, they go back out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's that story. Talk to me a little bit about the geographic distribution. You and I have had these chats in the past about where these security companies actually are, but what's the latest? What's the breakdown?
Yeah, so there are, out of the 2,300 I cataloged in the book, 1,300 are in the United States. Okay. So, and of those, the vast majority are in California. Okay. But people always talk about the next, Silicon Valley or Cyber Center, et cetera. And often Georgia is mentioned for Atlanta, because of the ISS stuff.
I heard Austin, DC,
Boston. So it is hands down, it's the DC area. So you got to add, I do it by states. You got to add Maryland, Virginia, and DC together.
Yeah.
And there's even some in Pennsylvania. So hands down, and that's because of the government interest in security now, and didn't hurt that CrowdStrike was there. But a bunch of other ones too, right? SourceFire was in Bethesda. Yeah. So those are having spinoffs, and of course, Booz Allen is investing money right and left and spending money. Boston is still quite the center. I am quite pleased that Michigan is surprising me. I think we're up to 32 security companies in Michigan. Thank you very much.
Heck, a lot of automotive security.
Yeah. Carumba moved their headquarters here. I'm still not sure. Just because you move your headquarters doesn't make you an American company, right? If all your development is still in Israel, you're still an Israeli company. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the YL Ventures portfolio would be happy to hear me say that, but they do make a point of moving to the U.S., which is the secret. And then worldwide, Israel is number 2, but they only have 222 vendors compared to the U.S. 1,300. Wow. So, and there are companies that claim they're research companies in Israel that claim there are 500. And I go through everything they publish. I go through the lists my friends in the investment community give me.
480 college interns.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, you got to have a logo or you don't get counted. They're only 222, which is a lot. And there's, and certainly they're born faster there, right? There's, 2 or 3 a quarter getting their first rounds.
There's been a lot of them out of government projects, as you know, pretty quickly. And, I know you have, I've been to Tel Aviv, and it's almost all of them have had some type of military government project that turned into and the government is great about supporting that. That's one of the industries that they actively are promoting and saying, hey, you researched this here, go turn it into a business, see what you can do,
Yeah.
see if you can be the next Checkpoint or Imperva, right?
Yep. So number 3 is the UK.
Okay.
So they've got 80 security vendors, which actually kind of surprised me. If you do bump into a UK security vendor, it's usually quite small, but there's some more, or bigger, successful ones. Dark Shadows, is it?
Digital Shadows?
Digital Shadows.
Yep.
So you've got those going for them, and I think it's a little bit of the buy local flavor in the UK. I think it's just hard for it. American companies tend to jump over the UK and go right to Belgium so they can sell to the big telcos in Europe. And it's too expensive to have an office in London for anybody, so they skip over it.
Indeed.
So it leaves a market opportunity. I am watching for continued signs of what I call digital mercantilism, which is just that buy local idea, or the country supports, building something in country. The ostensible reason is, hey, you can't buy U.S. products because the NSA has backdoors in it, right? You've heard that scare story before, right? But it's the U.S. talking about Huawei.
Yeah.
But that works both ways. And we have evidence for the NSA putting backdoors in American gear. We don't have any evidence for NSA putting backdoors in Huawei gear, of China putting backdoors in Huawei gear. So they're using that to say, oh, we got to have our own local security company that does X, Y, Z. And the EU has launched a project called GIA-X, which is to have an alternative to a cloud platform, which sounds laughable at the thought that a huge bureaucracy centered in, I think it's in France, similar to Airbus, right, could actually create a viable cloud environment, recreate what AWS has done.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you and I could do it, right? We could do it, host a rack, run vSphere, and we could sell compute infrastructure and build some tools on it and all that. That's great. But not if we had 100 people looking over our shoulders telling us how to do it.
Well, and the mercantilism, the way you talk through that was really interesting, because you think about getting a cordovan leather wallet or maybe some artisan made cheeses, but to extend that all the way out to technology in the cyberspace. Buy local for that. I think I saw a little bit of that when I was down in Australia and New Zealand particularly. Yep. And a lot of it just stemmed out of support, right? Time zones are really different. If they don't have 24/7 support, it makes it difficult for us to interact, and I get it from that. But that's interesting. So the United States, then we had Israel, then the UK. Who's after that?
Oh, Canada.
Okay.
Which is a big surprise. Is really Canada?
Yeah.
But that was a lot of that came from our original experiment in digital mercantilism, which were the crypto wars.
Yeah.
So the U.S. Made it illegal to work with foreigners on cryptography or to export algorithms. So the brain trust, there was brain drain in the U.S. And universities in Canada developed their crypto programs, including Waterloo, right across the border from me.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, Canada, home of Entrust, and of course Waterloo University, which is where all the crypto people get their degrees now. Yeah. That was just a perfect example of what happens when government gets in the way of the flow of technology. Right? They failed. Right? They completely failed to rein in strong encryption.
Yeah.
And we're all happy about that, but they're going to keep trying.
Yeah.
And they use fear to get there. Right?
Are you seeing anything out of Southern Europe? I know we had Alien Vault in Spain before they got picked up by AT&T, but I don't think I'm seeing a lot coming out of Southern Europe.
No, and for a while we had Panda, but now they've been acquired as well. But they'll still have a strong foothold in Spain. A few very interesting ones coming out of the Paris region in France.
Okay.
I sometimes worry about, the ability to get anything done in France, right? There are laws that say you can't work more than 9 to 5. And there are police whose job it is to make sure the parking lot's empty at 5 o'clock. During the dot-com boom, I was working with people there, and they just said it was so frustrating because they had to, hide from the police because they wanted to work all night to get their thing done.
You're working too long. Stop or you're gonna get arrested. Wow.
Yeah, or fined. Yeah. I'm sure somebody will criticize me if I can't think of any in Italy, but there are plenty. I could look it up in my book.
Yeah.
But Middle East has got some interesting things going, and that is for sure, the buy local thing, right? First
There it is.
first of all, they typically don't buy from Israel, so they don't have all those options, and they've got big pools of money that get invested in creating security startups.
And language support. So international localization, and then we got double byte languages, and there's a lot of things to consider, and almost. You always start, and I've been down this road many times. You always start off with English, and kicking and screaming, maybe you'll add German later on or Spanish, and then it's a big lift to add like kanji and things like that. So by the time you get to some of the other countries, it's tough. It's tough.
I just got done talking to most of the threat intelligence vendors, and that was always one of the questions we'd ask them. What languages do you support? And some would say, well, just English because everybody understands English, but some would actually have really good translations, so they would capture the hackers' conversations on the dark web in Russian or Slavic or something and translate it into Arabic for an Arabic analyst.
Yeah.
And I guess it was good enough to get the feel, because you really want to know those key indicators, right?
Yeah, and some of those are so regional, right? That's a whole. That's one of the things that's really tough about threat intelligence is all those different languages, and knowing the dialects, and then within that there's the slang and all the specific terms of. We have a tremendous amount of slang in English, of course, and then we get into security even more. So.
Yeah. The cool thing is that local law enforcement in, say, Romania. Would have a team that would do that monitoring, but they weren't getting paid. So it's easy for a threat intelligence company from the US to come in and say, we're going to pay you $1,000 a month to be an analyst for us. And boom, they all move over. They got
much better than not being paid.
Yeah, much better. And we're going to pay you in US dollars.
Well, I'll say this: if anybody hasn't gotten a copy yet of the book, it's let me get it up here. It's really great. A great introduction chapter, kind of history of our space, and then kind of just keeps you up to date on everything that's happening.
Don't forget all the companies I'm talking about, and all that data that I've talked about is in the back. So it's a directory. Not quite a yellow pages, but very similar.
Yeah, it has some real utility to it. And where's the best place to go to get it?
So you can get it on Amazon. I try and point people to it-harvest.com and just, go to the shop button, because this version is, pre-printed and, stitch bound and much more durable than what you get from Amazon, which is print on demand. So
that's a good point.
This is offset printed and, put love and care into it. And I've got 7,000 of them in my warehouse. So
you can actually get a higher quality book by going through IT Harvest, and one at a time help reduce your storage costs at your storage facility for all your books.
Yep.
And I'm guessing on IT Harvest as well, Up and to the Right and Cyber War and all your other books.
No, this is the only one I've ever printed. So
okay.
So the rest of them go to Amazon.
Go to Amazon for all the rest.
Yep, and including the most recent. So this was my 5th book.
Okay.
This is my 7th. So, Curmudgeon, How to Succeed as an Industry Analyst.
Oh,
there you go. It's kind of the follow-on to Up and to the Right, but
okay.
Somebody at Twitter said, "Oh, it's like sitting on the other side of the chess table." So,
very cool. Very cool.
You're gonna love this.
I can't wait. Well, always fascinating, Richard, talking with you, and congratulations on this book and all the other books that you have coming out, and hope to see you soon. I don't know if we're going to be able to make it to RSA this year, or
Fingers
next
crossed.
year.
Yeah.
fingers crossed, and it looks like some of the vaccines are showing some good progress. At least, again, this is mid-August when we're talking about it. Let's hope by the time this airs, it's all behind us. So.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
All right, my friend. You take care.
Thanks, Brian.
Yeah. Bye-bye.